Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Insights and Innovations. Today we have Bliss and we have our strategy lead, Harry Lam. So I'll hand over to Harry to take the wheel.
Awesome, thank you. Good day, guys. My name's Harry Lam. I'm the strategy lead for Bliss in ANZ. Today we're going to have a bit of fun. We're going to go back in time, back to the 1990s, right? I've got my vintage Liverpool 1994 jersey on, the away kit. I've got my Damon Albarn beads as well, and also a bottle of VB. So we're going to have some fun today. 90s were an incredible time for music, art, culture, sport. So many influential people, so many seismic moments, so much of which have influenced the world that we live in today. It was also an incredible time for fashion. As you can see here, nothing much has changed. I came to Australia in 1989 as a toddler, so I pretty much spent my entire childhood here in Australia in the 90s as well. I don't think this is unique to me, but much like everybody else, so much of my childhood is carried over to the things I love today, things like music and sport and fashion. But it also carries with me stuff like this, right? So petit miam is French for yum. Not quite sure it is, but that's burned in my memory. Every now and then when I have peanut butter, I think of Elvis. And I think within all of us is a person just wanting to scream out the window every time something frustrating happens, right? But thankfully, it seems like I'm not alone, right? So after I posted this flyer on LinkedIn a few weeks ago, the response has been really quite incredible. I've had so many conversations with clients and colleagues alike about their favorite 90s ad and what resonated with them. And even normies are getting involved, right? Like normies like my boys WhatsApp chat group. So a little bit about the boys here. So I've known these guys pretty much my whole life, right, for 3 decades. We all grew up together, went to the same school. I know you guys are squinting, so here's a bigger picture of us on the hip thrust machine. But these fellas, right, all working class lads, right, growing up in the West. None of them work in marketing though. They all have real jobs that have real impact in society. And that's important to note, right? Because normally our chat kind of looks like this, typical kind of boy stuff, like dressing up to go to the cinema, or dressing up to go to the gym, or the cost of living crisis and the impact that's having on really hot people everywhere. But even just the mention of TV ads in the 90s set the chat on fire. So here's Alan, 94811111. How many of you remember that one, right? So that, of course, is this little gem.
4811111, 4811111, 4811111, Pizza Hut delivery. 4811111, 4811111, 4811111, Pizza Hut delivery.
Pizza Hut now delivers the 1990 pairs deal. That's any 2 medium pizzas you like for just $19.90. So call Pizza Hut now on
4811111.
Right, rollerblades and massive pizzas, right? That was a medium pizza, so you definitely tell that's the 90s. And then on he went, right? Lubemobile. I haven't thought of Lubemobile for like 13 years, but here we are, right? Lubemobile will come to you 133032, or is it 13 Lube? Let's find out.
Just one thing you need to do.
On 133032.
For everything mechanical, we've got it. They'll fix the car. Lubemobile will come to you. 133032. That's 133032.
Oh, classic, right? So when he mentioned 133032, I knew that Lubemobile will come to you and they'll fix the car, home or office on the spot. And this face was burned in my memory. Why was that, right? And then on he went, right, like a Rain Man for TV ads in the 90s, right? Mr. Yawn, that's what it looks like to wake up next to me every morning. Solo Man, my mum was a massive fan of Solo Man. And by the end of the conversation, my mate Alan was now an expert in advertising, right? So if you are looking for someone who's an expert in 90s TV ads, and also someone who can lift 150 kilos straight off the bar, there's your man. But that was far from the only conversation, right? So whether it was colleagues or clients, so many great conversations, so many great memories. And they all seem to come from the same place, right? A place that is usually reserved for things like a favorite film or a piece of music that they haven't listened to for a long time. So it made me wonder, what was it about these ads that made them so memorable, so salient in our memory? And spoiler alert, we actually dig deeper, especially with the best of these ads. They did universal things that I think carry over to any era, any generation. But of course, there were certain things that made them of their time. So we're going to explore that first and give you guys a sense of what marketers had to deal with 25, 30 years ago. So let's go back in time, back to the 90s, and see what everything looked like. So this is the Blis team. This is what we look like now. We've got a team of 25 people, but this is the team for Indies. We've got Mitch here, who's sitting across from me right now. This is what he looked like back in the day. Always loved football. He's our best player, along with Scott, I think, who's also on the call. So not much has changed there. There's Elias, our head of sales, right? He's got a mullet, although he is Greek, isn't he? Speaking of mullet, there's Michelle, right? Always a sweetheart. And then Connor. Connor wasn't even around during the 90s, at least not in the form that we know him today. And there's old mate, right? So Sam was kind enough to open the archives up. How did the 8-year-old get his hands on all that protein? Unbelievable. Now I'm definitely viewing the world through rose-tinted glasses. To the eyes of an 8-year-old, leaders back then didn't seem that scary, right? So instead of a scary dude like Putin, the leader of Russia was a drunk uncle. We had our own drunk uncle in Bob Hawke, but I was a bit too young for him. I remember this guy though. And the most controversial thing about the American president was that he really loved his saxophone, especially when other people were playing it. So we're in Australia, obviously, right? So let's do the Aussie thing and check out the house prices back in the day. Read it and weep, right? So back in the day, the median house price was $129,000, right? That's a lot of jousting sticks, but that's only $268,000 adjusted for inflation. That's a bargain. Funnily enough, Corolla actually costs more in relative terms now, but that's offset by the price of petrol. In case you were wondering, if you wanted to buy the Kerrigan holiday home, I couldn't find the 90s price, but in 2006 it sold for $170,000. These days, a house in Bonnie Doon will set you back $700,000. So again, a lot of jousting sticks. Excuse me. It was a time of great rivalries, right? I don't think this was exclusive to the 90s, but we certainly loved a good battle back in the day, right? Whether it was technology or brands, like, Simple Video versus Video Easy, Blur versus Oasis. I mean, the answer is Pulp, but love Blur, love Oasis. Nintendo or Sega. Macarena or the Nutbush, right? Back in the day, in the form of child abuse, teachers used to make their kids do line dancing at assembly. It's usually one of these songs. East Coast versus West Coast, you can't go past Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre. Were you an indie kid or did you like the top 30? Like a bit of both. Spice Girls, Backstreet Boys, on and on it went, right? We loved the good rivalry. Coca-Cola versus Pepsi, Betamax versus VHS, you name it, right? We were used to comparing things against one another. And finally, you had to kind of remember everything, right? There was no GPS. If you wanted to go somewhere, you had to go to the street directory and then commit that route to memory. Same with addresses, same with telephone numbers. My dad's encyclopedia to this day of outdated telephone numbers from the 80s and 90s. And finally, media conditions were very different back in the day, right? There's firstly a fleeting nature to a lot of the content. There was no on-demand, there was no streaming. If you didn't catch a lot of stuff live, chances are it was gone. For about a whole decade, I didn't know how Seinfeld ended, right? Choices were a bit limited. Internet wasn't super mainstream back in the day, at least for us working class guys. Print was probably where the variety was, but when it comes to TV, radio, we had limited choices. I didn't get SBS for pretty much the entire decade, but thankfully I got it in time for our puberty. But we just consumed what was on, whatever was on, and therefore things like mass reach events were a bit easier to create and also be a part of. So when you put it all together, certain choices start to make sense, right? So for example, in the 90s, there was a massive prevalence of things like jingles. And that's because everyone had to remember, hard to remember things like telephone numbers, right? 94811111, 133032. Same with addresses, right? Coming down the Parramatta, walk down Auto Alley, all that sort of jazz. Same when it comes to the limited choice. That probably explains why we all were exposed to the same thing, right? So, we probably watched the same TV shows and saw the same ad 100 times, right? The marketers of the day just made use of what was around them and took full advantage. But what were the universal things, right? What were the things that stand the test of time? And the thing is, all the best ads and all the best brands made full use of universally sound marketing principles. So we're going to explore that right now. Now, firstly, all the best brands and best ads of the time were all creatively memorable. But what makes a memorable commercial? I love this quote from David Ogilvy, the GOAT, right? A good advertisement is one that sells a product without drawing attention to itself. What does he mean by that? So here are three brands, right? Three household names, especially in the 90s. I'm not sure Gen Z knows what Yellow Pages are, but Toyota Hilux, Qantas obviously, and obviously the classic flights. How would you sell this, right? I'm sure we've seen many ads of their ilk before. Well, there's generally two approaches, right? And usually most ads are a mixture of the two, but there's the rational, firstly. And I think this billboard from TPG, pardon me, this billboard from TPG is a classic example, right? So rational ads appeal to logic, they appeal to reason, they use things like prices, product features, they describe factual benefits, rational explanations, and the stereotype, I suppose, is really effective for short-term performance, right? And we've all seen ads like this. On the flip side, there's the emotional, right? So this tries to do the opposite type of thing. So instead, it uses humor, sentimentality, nostalgia, fear, happiness, stories to evoke, right, to strike an emotional response. And again, the stereotype here is long-term brand building. So if we were to sell these three products or brands in a rational way, it will kind of look like this, right? And we've all seen ads like this. So with Toyota, you might list the horsepower or the towing capacity. For Yellow Pages, you might state the ROI of getting involved. For Qantas, you might list the competitive advantages, right? All pretty standard. We see these ads all the time. And that's generally what they're really great at, right? So very short, sharp, immediate impact on sales and performance. I saw an ad, I think maybe 2 years ago when COVID was just dying down. I think it was Jetstar, right? And all the ad said was $99 one way to Vietnam, right? Short, sharp, and it worked, right? I clicked on that ad straight away. It didn't make me feel anything for Jetstar. It didn't really kind of give me positive feelings or negative feelings. I don't really think of them, when I think of a holiday. But in that moment, it worked, right? I clicked on it, away you go. But here's a challenge, right? And this is a classic piece of research from Les Binet and Peter Field. Short-term performance strategies tend to be quite temporary, right? So they work in that immediate sense, and then their effects fade. So you've got to constantly do this. Whereas if you consistently build your brand over time, right, the impact is cumulative. You slowly start to feel those results over time. And that's kind of what these brands did, right? So it's important to note that these brands were all market leaders at the time. Let's take a look.
Bugger. Fuck me. Bugger. Easy now, son. Ooh, bugger. You burnt.
Bugger.
Wait for it.
Bugger.
All right, really awesome, right? No mention of horsepower, no mention of towing capacity. This was a very memorable ad, right? If you were around during the time, you definitely saw it. And, using humor, using a light bit of profanity, this was a bit controversial at the time. It was enough to tell you that Hilux has more than enough power to deal with anything you can throw at it, right? It was very memorable. Next, Qantas. Let's take a look at Michael Jackson's favorite 90s ad. Listen. Oh my God. Right. Didn't even see a plane until the last shot there, right? Not only is Qantas your gateway to incredible places, but they're also your way home. And home is Australia because you're Australian, right? Tugs at the heartstrings. And finally, Yellow Pages.
John? John? Where's our ad in the Yellow Pages directory?
Keep calm. Count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 8, 9, 10.
Not happy, John!
All right. Cool. Being in the Yellow Pages is essential, right? So you better be in it. There's a deadline. You've got to be in it fast, right? FOMO, humor, a bit of irreverence, light profanity, sentimentality, wanderlust, right? Slight bit of patriotism, all these feelings, right? Emotion, storytelling. These are what stand out and stick in the memory, right? If you want to help your audience feel something about your brand, use these things. Humor, right? So according to Kantar, apparently since the COVID pandemic, the use of humor, intended humor, has actually declined a lot since then. So if you really want to stand out, these things work. And they work across the board, right? So whether it's all the things that you care about from a performance perspective, sales, winning share, all the way through to the intangibles, right? Like awareness, differentiation, fame, right? Emotional campaigns work across the board. And why is that? Well, we like to think that we're logical creatures making logical decisions every day, and we do, right? But so much of what we remember, so much of what sticks in our psyche is things that made us feel something. How we feel, our emotions, they're the things that stay with us. And that's what creativity can do. See, rational messages are really great for giving you a sense of what's different about your brand in the immediate short term. But what distinctiveness does, right, is that, and what the power of creativity does, is it allows your brand to be more easily identified. And that's the key to marketing. So let's explore distinctiveness for a little second. What is it about distinctiveness that is so important? I can barely say that word for some reason. I think the VB is kicking in here. In marketing, we like to think that our audience is there's a receptive audience waiting and willing out there just to receive our message, right? And all we got to do is just make them aware of our product, and then once they are, we just drive them down that funnel from awareness to consideration and down to purchase intent, and then finally purchasing the product. The reality is a bit messier. It's a bit more stark than that, right? And the fact is 95%, most people in any category is not in the market for your product right now. That's pretty much everyone. And it's true when you think about it, right? So whether it's VB, whether it's soap or detergent, TVs, cars, washing machines, well, I'm sure there are some weirdos out there who are thinking about washing machines all the time. But for most of us, unless we're actually in market for these things, we're not actively thinking about them, are we, right? So what to do, right? Well, some brands will focus on those in market, right? Very common strategy. But then you're reaching a very, very small pool, and you're also ignoring that massive 95%. And again, it sort of explains this, right? You're constantly having to push and push again when it comes to reaching for performance. The thing is, though, with the 95%, you have no way of knowing when that person will be in market, right? So what do? This brings us to the ultimate marketing, and that is to be easily thought of in buying situations, building that mental and memory cache, so when the time comes to buy something, you're front of mind, and that's mental availability, and it's how brands grow. So how does one build mental availability, right? It's by building these memories and by being distinct. So as we covered before, distinctiveness, if I can get that word out, is all about making your brand easily identifiable by customers. And I think an ad that did this really well was Goulburn Valley. So let's take a look.
Goulburn Valley Gold, luscious fruits now exotic. Goulburn Valley Gold, the taste will drive you wild. Just taste those.
Peaches and apricot and pineapple. Oh, pears and orange and passion fruit. It's juicy natural fruit.
And the only place it's sold is Goulburn Valley Gold.
All right. So everyone in the 90s knew within the first 3 seconds that this was a Goulburn Valley ad, right? And there were so many elements, so many things in that ad that made it very distinctive, right? So there's visual stuff like the logo was everywhere, the color palette, brand fonts, celebrities, these guys are the awesome foursome, very famous Olympians back in the 90s. Then there was a jingle, right? There was a certain tone of voice and also the brand personality. I think there were 4 or 5 versions of this ad in the 90s, and they all followed the same theme. And once that song came up, you knew it was them. These elements are what we call distinctive brand assets, as literally what makes a brand and a commercial distinct. And they're all things that we all recognize, right? So when we see that shape, we know that's a Toblerone. That font is Coca-Cola, right? It could be logos. They could be like, catchphrases. It could even be a story, right? The Snickers ad of the past 5 years, really fantastic. The story of that is being a massive prick until you have a Snickers, right? They've turned being a massive prick into a distinctive brand asset. I mean, that's incredible. And when these assets are really, really strong and you persist with them, everything works out, right? They make your creative more impactful. They make your campaign more impactful. They make your brand easier to remember, right? And to recall. And when you do that over time, it increases share, right? All the things you would care about. And that's really advertising in a nutshell, right? Building and refreshing these memories so when the time comes, your brand is front of mind. Let's talk about that time when people actually come to market. What does that look like? To help us do that, we're going to look at the GOAT of all 90s ads, the greatest of all time. Not Mr. Yawn, not Sorbent, in my opinion, and Alan's opinion, the VB ads. So let's take a look.
You can get it jumping. You can get it pumping. You can get it pressing a suit.
A hard-earned thirst needs a big cold beer. And the best cold beer is Vic, a long cold Vic.
You can get it lifted. You can get it shifted. You can get it any old now.
Matter of fact, I got it now. Vic Bitter.
Oh, classic. Matter of fact, I got it now. See, I told you I'm not an alcoholic, right? This is literally a prop. What made this ad special? Well, firstly, it has chock-a-block full of distinctive brand assets, right? The logo, the jingle, everyone in the 90s knew as soon as that song came up, it was a VB ad, right? So many distinctive things. But let's take a look at the imagery and what the voiceover was saying, right? You can get it jumping, you can get it pumping, you can get it walking, you can get it talking. These are all things that you're doing, right? Things that require effort, that make you tired, right? Matter of fact, I've got it now, a hard-earned thirst. What did I say? Hard-earned thirst. This is really kicking in here. These are all things that like motivations, right? Time. These are all category entry points, right? And what category entry points are? They're the cues that people use when they're faced with a buying situation. They're the memories that people use. And the genius of these ads is that they literally name and create their own CEPs, right? Anything, anywhere, any moment, anything you can do, you're doing that makes you tired, right, or thirsty. That's a reason to have a VB, and it's just genius, right? So, what are CEPs? Well, they're things like emotions, right? Like the exhaustion from a hard day at work, presenting at the IMAA, right? It could be thirst, right? It could be timing, what you're doing, where you are. You can get it walking. You could be in the mine, right? You could be on a boat. So many good things, right? And they just list them out and tell you what they are. And that's what really effective brands do, right? They own CEPs in their category. So who do you think of when you want some energy, right? Red Bull gives you wings, right? When you're on the break, what should you have? Have a break, have a Kit Kat. And my favorite one, I think the best one of all, MasterCard, right? There's special things in life that money can't buy. But for things that require money, everything else, MasterCard, right? So that's genius. So here's the thing, right? So when you combine distinctiveness, when you combine all these cachet and memories, and hopefully they become front of mind when the buying situation occurs, when those category entry points happen, you're onto a winner there. But that's not enough, right? And this is what separates some of the bigger brands and some of the more long-lasting brands from the likes of, and no offense, right, the Sorbents of the world and the Golden Valleys of the world, right? This is what makes VB Qantas stand out. And that's the idea that they were perpetually and always constantly acquiring. So here's the thing, right? These brands all knew that they couldn't afford to stop advertising or being active, right? No matter how big you are, being active is absolutely critical. And even within 1 or 2 years of stopping advertising has disastrous effects on performance. Why is that? Well, we like to think of our customers of any brand, as being driven by loyalists, when in reality, most people are light buyers, right? So the majority, 75 to 85% of buyers are light buyers. The heavy, the loyalists, make up a tiny fraction of the people who actually buy any given product. And if we don't pay attention to them, they also eventually become light buyers as well, right? So I knew a kid back in high school, he's Korean, and all he bought throughout his entire 20s was Korean cars, right? What does he drive now? A Mercedes. So really goes to show, and he loved Korean cars. So that's the thing, right? The battle is grow or shrink. Really that simple. The challenge with marketing is constantly acquiring new customers, and that's the only way to really grow your brand. And that's something that the likes of VB, or something that the likes of Qantas knew perfectly well. VB were everywhere, right? So there were 10 versions of those ads running all the time. They blasted you with it. They sponsored sports teams. They were in magazines, in print, on the radio. And sure, they could afford to do so with their massive budgets, but they wanted to be everywhere. They didn't care about burnout. They didn't care about being too in your face. In fact, they sought that. Burnout, right? So, especially in this digital age, we fuss a lot about frequency. But here's some interesting studies from System 1 and Analytic Partners doing very, very similar things. So they measured about 50,000 ads each, right? On the left here is System 1. What they did was they got people to rank their ads on day 1 all the way through to day 700 or something like that. And what they found was a good ad was perceived as a good ad on day 1, same as day 50, same as day 600. And a bad ad was bad from day 1, day 50, day 100, right? The way people perceived ads didn't really necessarily change. This is over 50,000 creatives. On the right here, Analytic Partners, they went one step further. They let 50,000 ads just run, right? And only 14, practically nothing, practically no evidence that there was creative burnout. The frequency challenge, right? Even if they were worried about frequency, the way that they approached that was really interesting, right? They updated their ads, but they retained what was important, and that was the distinctive brand assets. I'm not going to play the whole thing, just to give you a flavor.
You can get it talking. You can get it walking. You can feel it coming on about 4.
Right, you can get it walking, you can get it talking. This is one for the Olympics, or the build up to the Olympics.
How does it happen? You stand on the floor or painting a door and you feel like you're just gonna burst. You sure got a thirst. A hard-earned thirst needs a big cold beer. And the best...
I think you get the picture. And then here's 2004.
A hard-earned thirst needs a big cold beer, and no one deserves it more than David Boone. Yes, he didn't get that rock-hard guts from playing hacky sack. He got it from smashing boundaries. No high fives or jumping round when Booney made a ton. Just a tweak of the box, and it's back to business. We want Booney for Prime Minister, or stuffed and put on display next to Parliament, with the word Booney engraved on the glass, and a big cold beer in his glove. And the best cold beer is Vic.
Right, awesome. Walking, talking, lifting, shifting, right? You get the picture, right? Their solution to the frequency challenge was to keep what was important and switch it up. There you go. It also pays to be ubiquitous, right? Going back to the challenge of the fact that only 5% of people, your potential customers, are in market. What do they do with that? Well, they didn't focus on their own customers. They didn't focus on non-VB drinkers in market. They focused on the whole market, right? Because they knew that any given time, someone will think a beer, and away you go. And then finally, they knew the value of just letting things run like a nice soup, right? Letting things simmer and simmer over time. And research tells us that when campaigns are left alone to burn in the memories of our audience, becomes more effective. Not only that, but the more channels you use, right? And coincidentally, more money as well. But even on the money thing, right? Obviously, these brands were backed with massive budgets, but it's been proven in research that even smaller budgets, letting a campaign run over time is more effective than one short, sharp burst. And it's because of this. going back to this classic slide once again, building a brand over time, let it simmer in the minds of consumers. And when you do that, and when you put it all together, right, that's marketing, that's advertising, right? Getting their attention with something catchy and funny or emotional, right? Let it sink in their memory with something distinctive. And then hopefully enough, if you do it enough times, they become salient when a buying occasion occurs. And if you do it enough, your brand grows. That's all marketing really is. So I'm going to leave you with Alfie Langer's 90s guide to being simply the best, right? Make them feel something, right? Sure, you can describe something in logical detail, right? You might, you might be effective there, but if you want them to call you back in the morning, make them feel something. Don't be different, be distinctive, stand out. And if you own every cue, and if you constantly do it, you're on to a winner. And then one last one, take advantage of your era, right? Going back to the very, very beginning. In the 90s, you have to remember things like phone numbers, addresses, right? So people use jingles. What is distinctive about our era? There's a lot of talk about like how it's harder to reach mass reach events these days, but on the opposite end, that fragmentation means that more moments are addressable than ever before, right? So I think a lot of those brands would have killed to have access to someone when they're literally hungry or when they're on the commute, right? We can do that stuff now, right? Stuff like digital out of home or audio gets you in the journey. And we help brands do that all the time. This is a bit messy, but we helped a government brand reach out to road trippers a while back. So we put together an audience based on people we know are likely to take road trips. When they're at home before the trip, we hit them on CTV, on video, on digital. When they're at the bottle-o, we hit them with digital out of home and mobile messages. And then when they're on the road, we hit them with Spotify. We hit them with podcasts, right? To remind them to stop speeding, to remind them to take a break, right? And then something that we see all the time is really fantastic, right? Using tech and using what's around us to add more dimensions of creativity, right? Adding things like weather, things like location, like things like timing. All these things can add to the creativity that is required to really make a mark on consumers. And a really great brand that does that, a modern version, Snickers, right? As I mentioned before, right? They turned being a prick into a distinctive brand asset. Really incredible. It wasn't just TV, it wasn't just video, purely, definitely omni-channel. And it became so distinctive that it was memeable, right? People created memes about these ads. Final slide, right? So normally in these presentations, I usually tie everything into a neat bow, and usually ends up being something like everything that you saw just now, we can solve or we can fix at Blis. But I'm not going to do that. You guys can see through it. Instead, I'm going to debase myself for your entertainment just one last time. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and do this. How does it happen? You can get it analyzed. You can get it strategized. You can activate and measure an option. Even with after your campaign needs a clear-cut omnichannel technique. The best omnichannel technique is Blis plan, buy, and measure. Plan responsibly. Thank you, guys. Cheers.
Thank you so much for that, Harry. That was very entertaining. Probably one of the most entertaining ones I've seen. If there are any questions, please feel free to send them through to us and we can forward them on through to team at Blis. Otherwise, everyone, thank you so much for joining and we'll see you next week.